Welcome back. So this week we're going to work on this little butterfly for one of our sides for our box. And in the last video I showed you how to draw this all out. And I've chosen my fabrics for each section of the butterfly. And I mentioned that you could take a photo of this so that you could refer to the photo for the layout of the butterfly. But another thing you can do is just take a piece of paper, make an outline, 5.5 inch outline, and then a line down the middle. And this will just be your reference guide before we cut out the templates. Okay, so then you're just gonna trace. And this doesn't have to be perfect, obviously. It's just a reference line. Okay, and then flip it over. Line up your drawn lines here. And I am obviously using a Sharpie because you can see it through all kinds of layers. And then of course you can just label your numbers. And now you're safe to just cut these right out on the line. And then these are what we're going to use as our templates. So I've got my iron heating up. I've got my grid with my batting. This is going to be my background fabric for my butterfly. And then I'm just going to start cutting out these templates and assigning them to each fabric. So there is a million ways you can go about putting these fabrics onto your background piece. We're going to do a little combo. You could do raw edge applique, which is just placing a sheet of fusible interfacing on your fabric, putting your template in, cutting it right on the line. We're going to do an edge treatment on everything. So if you love raw edge applique, of course you can do it that way. I do like the look of turning the edges, so we're going to do that in this video. And like I said, you can use freezer paper, you can use all kinds of different things to fold your seams down on the places that you're going to fold. And I have other videos on how to do raw edge and turned applique. You could mark your fabric where your butterfly is and then just do needle turn applique. There's just so many ways, but I'm going to try to show you the most rudimentary way to make really nice applique without needing a lot of materials. You know, all you need is just a piece of paper and then your template material, whether it's Myhre, postcard, watercolor paper, whatever. So from here, what you want to do is just assign each template to a fabric. So I'm going to go, I'm going to do 4 on this color. And you can always color your butterfly first too if you want to see what it's going to look like before you add it. I personally really like the surprise, so I'm just going to dive in. You know me, I'm just like, let's see what this is going to look like without a lot of prep work. That's my thing. Okay, so this is what I'm going to use for each template. And let's go ahead and just start with 1. So I'm going to set these all aside. And then to prep the background, whether you're using felt or fabric, linen, whatever it is that you want for your background, just fold it in half and lightly press a center seam. Just a little light one, just so I know where the center is. I'm going to set that aside. Take your chosen fabric for your first piece and just fold it right sides together. Okay, so obviously we need the front of this and we also need the reverse of this. And as far as choosing your fabrics, I've chosen a couple things that do have a print. I don't think I would do anything with like motifs or anything specific unless you're really going willy-nilly, because you're going to want sort of symmetry here. So you could do all solids, something with like a little calico, a mini print. I really want it to be as symmetrical as possible. So what I'm doing here is I'm just outlining the actual template with a chalk pencil. if you can't see the chalk pencil, this is actually really hard to see, then I would probably grab a Frixion pen. I would not do Sharpie here because Sharpie, I learned the hard way, does bleed through your fabric. So here are the erasable Frixion pen that you could use. They do erase with the heat of the iron, but only the ink. The residue that holds the ink does stay behind, so be really careful when you use these pens on the front of your fabric. But of course we're marking on the inside, so it doesn't matter. And we're just gonna use this line anyway for just a little moment because we are gonna be pressing the seams down over the wrong side. So it's just a really temporary little mark that you're making. But at least with the Frixion, it won't run through. Oh, and incidentally, we are going to be cutting 1/4 of an inch around this, so you want to make sure you have that room. Like don't put it right here on the side because you need that 1/4 inch. We're going to be turning some of the sides on this. Much better. You can just go ahead and cut out the double layer. So you're going to have the image itself and the reverse because your fabric is folded in half. Then flip it over. Put the reverse of the template on the back. Yay. Okay, so going back to our piece of paper here, the fabric is going to fit like this. So some of these ends will be folded under and some won't. And you'll determine that by knowing what's going to lay on top of it. So this is number 1. This is going to go underneath number 2 and underneath number 3. So we don't have to fold the short side here under, and we don't have to fold this under. Now 5 could go on top of 1 here, but the thing is then you're going to have to split it and just fold part of it down. So I think what I'm going to do is just fold the whole thing down on this whole full edge and then do the same thing on 5 and just butt them right up against each other. And again, we are going to be doing a seam treatment on each of these, but what if we weren't? We want it to make it look as good as possible. So I'm only going to be folding under this side and this side. So to make sure you've got the right fabric for the right template, this fits here like this, right? So we know that this is going to fit like this. And we know this fabric is going to go right on top of that. So we can go right under here like this. And then we're going to pop that right back into place. And then I'm just going to fold this and this, right? Because those are the only 2 that we need to fold. And again, there are so many different ways that you can do this. I'm not using any sort of starch. I'm not doing anything. Really what I'm doing is a needle turn applique technique, but making it easier on myself by establishing a seam line to stitch along. For me, needle turn applique is beautiful. I don't find it very relaxing because I am constantly like struggling to not get points in the corner, and also some fabrics are really stiff. They don't bend very well. So I'm just going to hold this fabric in place and I'm going to begin to just press the seam down. Now the trick to this without getting points is just work a little bit at a time. See how it's folding on the inside here? Just to get your smooth edge, put your iron right up next to that template and begin to press in. Now some people use starch here. You sure could. Some people will glue it onto the template. You sure could. But we are really, it's just not essential because we're just trying to establish that seam line to be able to sew this on. And the other reason why this is great, where we're not just going along with needle turn applique without pressing our seam line, is we're not marking the background. Now you could, but this is a pretty easy thing to eye up, I think. Well, we'll see. You know me. Okay. So you want the folds of the fabric to happen out here along the edge, not along your template. Just press it down and hold it for a minute. And then we said we were going to fold this one down and just make a little crease along your template here with your little iron. Then when you take your template out, you've got this great seam line, and that's what you're going to use to stitch this onto the background. So go ahead, and then on the reverse, working in the reverse can get really confusing. So what I do is I'll just like, okay, put your template on your reference guide. This fabric is going to go here, right? And then pick it up, and then you're free to go ahead and press along here and here. Okay, so as far as stitching them on, of course you could mark the butterfly with a chalk pencil or a Frixion. You could certainly do that. You know, you could take your ruler and measure up where this sits. So this is 2 1/4 about, right? So I'm going to just go here, and at 2 1/4 is going to be this very little point, which is right here. And remember that your seam allowances. So you're going to want to put the fold line on the 2 1/4, right? And the other thing that you can do, you can actually use this as an outline. Just put that all up along your fabric. And then we know that this is going to sit along that outline here. I'm going to raise this up just a little bit more, but at least we've got the angle right. Okay. And then I'm going to take a pin it in place, and then I'm just going to stitch along that fold line into the felt. But these edges I can leave raw because I'm going to be covering them with another fabric here. Okay, once you got it folded, you can check that one more time. Yep, make sure you got your angle right. So I'm going to start here, work up to the corner, and then come back around. So generally when you're appliquing, you want to make sure that you match the thread color to your applique piece. In this case, I'm just going to use black the entire time because I know that I'm going to be putting stitching along the sides there. So I'm not going to be too hyper about that. Okay, so I'm coming up through the back of the fabric, and I am getting literally like a thread on the edge there. Because really, ideally, applique, you don't want to see it. Directly across from where I'm coming out of the fabric, you're going to insert your needle in about 1/8 of an inch away, come back up, and right through one thread of this fold here. Okay, I'm coming out directly out here, so I'm going to insert the needle into the background only, 1/8 of an inch away, and come up through the background and the applique right on the edge. Okay, and then just after a couple stitches, just stop, make sure your point is on the fold there. We'll probably do a little stitched butterfly body, but as you can see on here, it's just like this little point that touches the center line there, just through a thread. We're trying to bury this applique thread really underneath it so we don't see it at all. And if you need to readjust your pin, whatever you have to do, just to make sure that that is going to stay in place, go ahead and do that. So I've gotten to my corner. I know it's hard to see because it's black, but that's my seam line, my fold line that I did before. So to continue on, all you're going to do, you can take your needle, you can take your hand, and just tuck that under. Okay, and then I like to just take a couple little stitches in the corner here. . 'Kay, 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 ' Make sure that corner touches your center seam line. Make tight little stitches, pick up the applique. You want that nice rounded edge here, so if you're having any points or whatever, any fabric points, you can mitigate that as you're working along. That looks pretty good to me. So I'm gonna actually pop that pin in there, and that will help keep that fold down. There's a little point right there, so I'll show you how to bridge that. It's tiny though, I'm not worried about it. Piece 5 is gonna sit up right up against there. Okay, and then just continue along. Come right on the fold, one little teeny tiny little piece. So you can kind of tell as I'm cruising along here, got a little, it's a little pointy right there. So we're just gonna use your needle and mess with the folds of the fabric to spread that out a little bit. And once you get it nice and rounded, just take your fingernail and round it out. Move the pin over a little bit, and then just make sure you're continuing along on your pressed seam. Just pin that seam down, and then just to check yourself. That's pretty good. And don't worry if your little corner's right there. We're gonna do a little butterfly body on top of it. That's perfectly fine. The 5 is gonna lay on top, so it'll look awesome. So just stitch on down, just a little bit past that pin. And then when it comes time to do the other side, just flip your little template over, template outline over, right? Make sure that you're right up against this one. They do touch, just on the little corner there. And then pin it in place, and then just start here and stitch up and around. Okay, and that looks pretty good to me. And remember, try not to go for total and complete perfection. It is a butterfly. Things in nature are not perfect. We are not perfect. Just get it to where you're doing your best work and you're happy with it. You know, you can see here, it's not perfect. I'm working on felt. You know, I'm working with this fabric that's got these metallic dots on it. So it's not perfect, not by any means, but the 5 is gonna lay right against here. Again, we're gonna do this seam treatment on there. So just make it, you know, eye it up, enjoy the process, and don't strive so much for getting it absolutely perfect. Okay, so here I'm coming up to a place where there's a deeper arc here, a deeper bend. So take your needle and you can manipulate the fibers underneath the folds of the fabric. So going right up to where that point is kind of starting, I'm going to take a teeny tiny little stitch, and you know that your applique will be more smooth and round the smaller stitches you take. So here, you know, I've got a lot of bunchy fabric in here because we had to do that to make it fold. So you see how you can take your needle and really shape the piece, but we do already have our established fold line, so we're good to go there. So just dive into the background and take a teeny tiny little stitch right here. Okay, now I'm getting towards that pin. So let's take that out, refold our lines, make sure we're on our mark there. I'm eyeing it up. To me, that looks pretty good. And then just continue your applique down. I would just stitch to there and then end it. This side turned out just a little bit more round. I do still have a little peak right there. Again, it's going to be covered, not a big deal. But it is worth mentioning that this piece I did, you know, from right to left. I'm right-handed. This piece I did left to right. So it was a little bit more awkward. So had I started here and gone right to left, just because that's my natural dominant way of doing things, this probably would have turned out a little bit more round. So go ahead, if you're worried about it, just, you know, if you're right-handed, go right to left. If you're left, go left to right. and that should round it out. But I am pleased with what that looks like. I'm perfectly fine. So now you can set aside the piece 1. Piece 2, I'm going to use this, and then again making sure you have 1/4 of an inch. Just always try to save as much fabric as possible. Make sure you have 1/4 of an inch going around all the sides of the template, because remember we need that to fold under. Always take your iron away and then press back in, rather than just pressing a big seam, because you'll get creases in your folds if you just take like one big line. You want to come at it from every single angle on that arc there. Alrighty, so for the second piece, what I like to do is just put the template on the first piece, the folded edges. So that way you know the corner of this is going to hit right there. So this is my folded edge to go under, and the corner of the seam, the pressed under seam, will go here. So I'm just going to pop a pin in it just to anchor it down. I'm going to put another pin right here, and then just make sure that this is going to lay along this edge. And you know, I think I'm going to lift it up just a little bit. Again, we're just eyeing this up and getting close here, and I like the angle of that. So take this pin, pop it in place. Might even do 2 pins right here. Let's probably start stitching right here, come up to the corner, and if that's the case, then we're going to go like this. It's just best to deal with that fabric after the fact. Obviously, we're going to stitch up here through the background of the felt, and then here on top of the fabric. You can pick up the felt piece in the background, but it's really not necessary. You just can stitch this to fabric 1. So I'm going to stitch both sides of that, making sure I'm checking my measurements and everything, and then we're going to stitch piece 3, and then I'm gonna have to deal with the fact that my butterfly corner went all the way out, and of course I rounded my corners here. So I'm gonna probably end up cutting my template just so that my butterfly point ends right here. No big deal. That's just one of the things you encounter when you do freeform. We make those little decisions as we work, and it all turns out just as beautiful. And then as you're stitching, just go ahead and check your pieces. You know, like just hold them up, get close. Again, it's not going to be perfect. It's just not. But that's okay. That's close enough for me. That looks good. Now sometimes I've seen needle applique artists take their template and then take a pencil, or again with the silver marker, and draw it on the outside. So if you just need a little bit more guidance, that would be your stitching line. It's great because it doesn't show unless that light hits it right, and if you're stitching on the line, it's going to kind of tuck under. So I've done that before. I think it's fine to do. If you just feel like this is way too loosey-goosey and you can't find that established stitch line, you could certainly do it that way. I'll put a pin in there, and then I'll stop the stitching right about here because I know I'm going to have to cut some of this. So just looking at it, I think that's fine. As long as that side mimics this side, it really doesn't matter. So my rounded corner kind of goes like this, right? So I'm just gonna snip that part of the template off, and that'll fit in there just perfectly. So this is gonna be a pretty intense curve. We have to fold all of this down. This is a very sharp point. We have to fold all that down all the way around. So this is a little bit trickier. So again, if you're really new to this, don't expect perfection. Mine certainly isn't going to be perfect at all. But we're going to just do our best, right? And then popping it on this side, that fits in just great. Okay, so pin the third piece on, and the best way to check to make sure it is how you want it is just put your templates. If you're working on the left-hand side, of course, these are your reverse templates. And that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so around this corner, what can happen is your fold lines, you're pressing down on it so much, your fold lines can come out. So I'm gonna just show you what I mean about using a silver pen. You could do this with a Frixion too. Just, be aware that if you're using a solid fabric, some of that white line residue will show even after you've ironed it away. But if you just outline this, the silver's really great. It hardly shows, but it gives you a good idea of at least where the line is that you want to stitch on. And incidentally, if you have a piece of applique that's really intense like this, where it's got a crazy point and this sharp curve, the best thing to do is just use light fabrics. I don't mean light color, I mean light in weight, like shot cottons or just something that's really flimsy. So I'm going to continue down the line, and the curve starts about right there. So just take your needle and just begin to, it's kind of a pleat action actually. If you kind of put your needle out here towards the edge and scoop it underneath, the fabric will really fold on itself. And then usually I just cheat and take my little fingernail and pop it down. Okay, so at least we've got some tucked in, and then I'll take the needle and I'll lift up on it just to round that corner. So let go, loosen up your grip on it. And then you just use your needle to shape it in place. Now this is going to come up right up against the edge. And since I'm going to be stitching this onto my box, I'm going to cheat a little bit and just do this like whip stitch almost. Okay, here I'm at another place where I'll want to tuck some more and pleat. Do you see how it's kind of pleating back there? And then take your hand and then just, yeah, I'm just going to whip stitch this. And then here, just tuck it in, and when you get a good rounded corner that you like, make an extra little crease, and then there you have it, is your nice rounded butterfly. So that looks good to me. I'm going to continue on with the butterfly, doing the exact techniques that I showed you. So just talking it through, the next piece I'm going to do is 4, and then I'm going to do 5. Now 5, all of the sides except for this one will be folded under. 4, it's going to be just this one and this one. So it's going to act like here. So like where we did 1, this will be where you're going to do your first one. And you'll tuck in this and this, and then you're going to do 5, and you're going to tuck in this, this, and this, right? Because this line, this applique is going to go over 4, and then the only raw edges that you'll have left are the raw edges from 4 and 5, and then 6, you're going to do the same thing here. Okay, so I've got my other side of 3 on, and then I put 4 on. Nothing new here, just kept an eye on my measurements. But when you go to turn a curve, a really aggressive concave curve like this, you've got to clip right up to the line, not past the line obviously, but like every 1/4 of an inch or so you need to clip that, or the fabric will never fold the way you want it to. So just make sure when you're doing pieces 5 and 6, you clip just here. And this is a bit of an arc, but we're not turning this side. On 6, there's a little curve action here, just a little one. So we'll just snip it. And I like to just use really sharp, these are serrated scissors. The Karen K. Buckley Perfect Scissors are really great. Just so that that fabric, when you fold it back, it's going to want to spread out. So you're going to see those little creases in there. Okay, so here it is all completed and stitched onto the grid work with the piece of batting underneath. And so I thought I would play with some of the stitches on the seams. And so I just, on the left side of the butterfly here, I did just some various stitches that we'll go through here next. So we'll start here. So grab some bugle beads and some little size 12 seed beads and a beading needle. Okay, so I've got a double strand of just regular sewing thread on a beading needle, and I'm going to pop it right up here in the corner and then place a 12, a bugle, and a 12. Scooch the beads down and then put the needle down right where that black bead is going to end. And then come up right between the bugle bead and the size 12 seed bead. Right on the seam line there. And then add a bugle and a 12. And incidentally, if you have leftovers of these fabrics, these are great to use as lining pieces, and that's what we're going to work on next time, is the linings, the pockets, and then the assembly of the box. So that will be really fun. Okay, and then just push the beads down, insert the needle into the seam. Come up between the bugle and the 12 seed bead, go through the seed bead again, and then a bugle and a 12. And so you're going to do that all the way up to this point. And then what I did is I came here and I just worked a line right down to there. I didn't draw it out or anything, so I just sort of worked on down until it came down to here. And then in between those two little bugle 12 seed bead lines, I'm just working some really wonky fly stitches. So just come up at the top. Even here, don't go like all the way up to the top. You can stop at a halfway point. Just one more random stitch there on the side. All right, and then as long as we have black in our hand, I did a little chain stitch line up here, so we can do that. So starting right at the point. I took pretty big chain stitches here because I wanted to fill them in with a like color. So about 1/4 of an inch, working right along the seam line there. Right inside that loop, 1/4 of an inch away. Make sure you're over the thread on those, as always. Okay, and just work that all the way up to the tops. And then inside these chains, let's fill them with a mohair. And I'm using a similar color to the fabric just below it, just a little bit lighter, but a contrast would be really pretty too here. So just working inside the chain, and it's just as easy. It's almost like you're doing a back stitch. Just come up to the top of the next chain there. And see how it fills it in. It looks kind of like just a little chain border. Dig underneath, so I'm just getting the batting and the felt here. I'm not going, sometimes I go through the grid when I work up and down on the surface, and then sometimes it's just as easy to work across here like this. Okay, so just fill that in along the top. I'm not sure if I mentioned what I was using in here, but if I didn't, it's 3 strands of DMC floss, and that's for here and up the side. And of course, use any color you want to. That's just what I happen to use, that I matched those two up. Now let's do this little treatment down this seam. So what I have here is a size 8 pearl cotton. And I'm just gonna do a Y stitch that straddles each side of this seam here. So I'm coming up about 1/8 of an inch away on the one side, 1/8 of an inch away on that side, and then just come up in a V right on the seam there. And then before going down into the seam again, just place a bead. And here I'm using size 6 seed beads. Just enough room for that bead go down. And one thing that I did go back and do, because I did want these beads to lay flat, was I went right back up into that fly stitch exit point at the bottom of the bead, and then through the bead again, okay. All right, and so on either side again of that white line, and it doesn't matter what side you start with, whatever's easier. Sometimes it's almost easier to work upside down. On the other side of the white line, and then come up through that bead again. Just to hold it. Okay, and then just finish that down to here. And then up here, I just used a sparkly embroidery thread or yarn. And I'm just doing a split stitch right up the side just to outline it. So about 1/4 of an inch. Come up through the fabric and the yarn that you're using. Split stitch. Very pretty. So usually what I'll do is I'll just hold that out of the way. I'll come up with my stitch and then just pop the thread that I'm using right on top of the needle. So it's splitting, and I just roll that yarn right onto the needle and it comes right up through it. Okay, so just work that up to the top here. Okay, and then for his antenna, this is just a simple little back stitch. Okay, and then if you remember, the back stitch is just every 1/8 of an inch. Come up, go back, fill that space right here, go right into where you were coming out of, and then whatever direction you want to go. I'm not really being too careful about these being exactly the same since they're antennae. He's reaching out to all kinds of different places, I'm sure of it. Okay, and then the last stitch, I'm just putting in a size 8 seed bead. And then coming up again, come up through the bead. And down. All right, so for this little treatment, we're going to start here and then work our way down. And here I'm using 3 strands of silver DMC floss. So kind of like a fly stitch what we did up here, we're going to work on either side of this seam. All the legs will be angling this way. But we see how you have that nice spine down here. It's a little bit different than a fly stitch. This is called the Fern Stitch. So you're going to come up about 1/4 of an inch from where you want your line to end. And then come up where you came up the first time. About halfway up this line here, and 1/8 of an inch over, insert your needle. Come up in that same spot, and then insert your needle into the actual fabric. So it should make a direct line right across here. And then just start that bunch again. So you're going to go below it about 1/4 of an inch. These you want to try to keep consistent because see how you're going to be able to see these lines. So you're going to want to try to keep them as even as possible apart. Mine aren't perfect, obviously. And then back into the bottom of the set you did previously. So again, it's up. You just keep going up at the same point, working just along the seam. So here is where you want to keep your line. So you can see the previous line here. You want to keep your line parallel to that and exiting out about the same distance. Bottom, and then I'm going to try to keep parallel to this line here. So if you hold your needle up like that, then you'll have an exit point. Okay, all the way down to here. You're going to work that. Okay, so then once you finish your little line of fern stitching, I threaded a sparkly yarn. This is sort of like couching, but you've done the stitching before. It's really fun. I'm just gonna come up right here, right where this sparkly yarn ended. And then I'm just gonna weave it through just these outer spokes here, maybe 2 at a time. And when you're through the last one, just poke it all the way through the back. And then on the tops of the little spokes, all I did was I sewed size 12 seed beads on with a double strand of sewing thread. And as far as sewing these on, since you'll have a double strand of sewing thread, you really only need to go through it one time. I mean, these beads are so tiny that they are not going anywhere. And so what I do is I just come right up on a spoke there, and then just away from it, almost in the same hole. Honestly, they're so small. And then just exit right out on top of the next spoke. Pull slow. This stuff tends to knot up. Place another bead right on top of the next spoke. Okay, and then working along the outside here, just gonna do a stem stitch coming down this outer line, just at the point there. Okay, the fabric's on the outside. Exit the needle out right between, halfway between the entry and the exit point here. Really slow. This is a velour velvet silk yarn. It's really yum yum. But you have to pull slowly because it'll fray. So just 1/4 of an inch away. Come out through the entrance point of the last stitch. All the way down, and then I took this yarn that I did this edge treatment with and I wrapped it. So since my butterfly is at the end of these fabrics, I just ended it right where the white line and the applique crazy patch ended. And then just coming up from the bottom, I just went into every place that I have a stitch. You can kind of feel that little space in there. And it just twists right up. And then just bury that down in there and tie it off in the back. Okay, so then this here is just a novelty yarn that I wanted to couch on either side. But rather than pulling it through and fraying some of these fibers, what you could do is take the yarn on one end and poke it through where you're going to want to end it. Thread the other side of the yarn and then just poke it to where you're going to end it. What I did here is I just manipulated it so all the little flags stuck out this way. But we've got to couch that down. So with the light color, size 8 pearl cotton white, I'm just going to couch down in between these little fringes. I'm going to come up really, really close to the fabric, making sure the yarn is between the needle and the fabric. Come up and then just stab straight down on the other side of the needle, right on the seam line. Okay, and then what I did was I just took a contrasting color of DMC floss, 2 strands, and it depends on the yarn that you use. Obviously, if you need to do anything additional, you may not, but I wanted to make sure that these little flags laid down. So on either side of that flag, I'm just putting a little stitch. Kind of looks like the little flag is coming out of a base stitch there. And then along this seam, that same yarn that I did up in here, I just worked a couple little fly stitches. So just above the seam there, place the V in the center of them on the seam. Okay, put a copper bead on to finish out the bottom of the fly stitch. And then right in the center and above, just came down with an additional line. So these fly stitches I worked in a row so that I had the next one coming out of the same hole. We're very, very close. Place a bead. Down. Just do one stab stitch there in the center. As you're stitching, just watch your heights, and you want that to flow in a line. So work all the way down. Leave a little bit of room because we're going to do a little treatment here. So maybe not all the way down, 1/4 of an inch from here. So I have 6 seed beads here. I'm going to stop when I have 6 on this side. And then I plied apart that delicious silk yarn that I have. On either side of this post that you've done, we're working upside down fly stitch. And of course, if you wanted to even go further, you could add a bead here before you put it under. But I thought this is getting pretty beady, so sometimes it's nice just to have the color and texture. So just here on either side of this little center post. And then I made this fly stitch stick up just a little bit above. You can see those little spokes there. All right, so here we're gonna put a sequence, give him a little dot down there. And make sure it's gonna sit about in the same spot before you commit. That looks pretty good to me. Now this is 3 strands of DMC, so it should be pretty strong. If you feel like you want to go through it again, I just might, because that bead does want to wiggle around a little bit. And then I just did French knots going up the side. Looks like I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I did a 4 wrap, and then a couple 2s, and then a 1, just to mimic up this line here. One, 2, 3, 4. Slide the yarn under. Okay, and then the very last seam treatment is this one up here. So all I did was just a couple of chain stitches with a bead on top and then a bead in between them. Okay, and that is with size 8 pearl cotton. Looking at this, looks like everything's kind of pointing down. So I'm thinking I'm going to start at the top here. And then I put on a size 8 gold bead right on the top of the loop, and then a 1/4 of an inch away, and then just make sure you look at your other side here and look at your spacing. Yeah, it's about 1/4 of an inch. All right, okay, and so then continue that all the way down and just count how many you have and get close. If you're 1 or 2 off, that's okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, just 8. Okay, and then once you worked all the way down, what I did was I just put a size 8 seed bead on the seam in between each chain stitch. Kind of working it like a back stitch, just moving across the fabric there. All right, and then once you do that, all the seams will be covered with stitchy goodness. And of course, these are all just ideas. I'm sure if you've had any experience with stitching that you'll have other ideas. I'd so love to see them. Post your pictures on Mandala for sure. I would love, love, love to see your colors. I'd love to see your ideas for the stitch lines, and I'm sure everybody would. And as of this taping, here is a photo that came through from the Embroidered Mandala. I love the way that Tracy used some of the ideas from the video and then put some of her own ideas in. The bouillons are really great. It's so fun to see those photos come through. So thanks you guys for sharing. And then all I did for his body was I just went, I have a strand of mohair yarn on a needle. Getting up through this grid here. Just literally up and back down. And that was it. So I've got 3, this is the 4th. Do one more on this side. I don't know, there's just something really cool about the texture of his body, so I'm not even sure I'm gonna do the beads. I mean, I guess it's worth doing just to see. But I don't know, I just kind of love him. I did a longer one in the center. But I am really, really happy with the way he turned out. I'm really excited about it. I was thinking as I was making this, I was like, gosh, wouldn't a box with just all 4 butterfly sides be amazing? Just doing different colors, different styles of butterflies, moths, whatever, scarab beetles. I love making those too. So yeah, I'm thinking that could be my next box. I'm liking the butterflies. Okay, well that is it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've certainly enjoyed stitching along with you. Next week, we're actually gonna put the box together. So go ahead and prepare your linings, and we're gonna go through making pockets and then stitching the box all together and then working along the top. And maybe by then I'll figure out some sort of handle so that we can carry our little box around. And then we're going to continue on with a few more videos just on different 6-inch squares in case maybe you want all your box to be freeform like my first one, or you know, maybe you want to do some more mandalas or just experiment with different things. So, but let me know your ideas. I would love to see pictures. Thanks again so much for joining me, and I will see you next Sunday. Have a great week and happy stitching.